Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm from the Katelyn Health Access Initiative. My name is Katelyn Woolheater. I work on the global malaria team. TRI has a couple of different disease areas, but work specifically malaria and primarily in Southern Africa. So TRI has benefited greatly from all of this malaria mapping that it seems like everyone at the summit has supported. So first, thank you all so much for any contributions that you did do, and just everything around HOT, all the stuff that we've mapped has been really great for the work that we're doing in the malaria space. So yeah, I just put a slide together to show that with the help of HOT, Digital Globe, American Red Cross, Bill and Melinda Gates, we now mapped the malaria endemic areas in Southern Africa, Botswana, Zimbabwe, and Swaziland, as well as a number of other malaria endemic areas in other regions. I guess the building count is almost up to 5 million. That's insane. Okay, so just to take a step back a little bit about malaria and malaria elimination. There's been huge investments since 2000, primarily in getting access to ACTs, which is the frontline treatment for malaria, as well as bed nets to malaria endemic areas. As a result, we've seen an unprecedented decrease in malaria across the world, especially in Africa. What you see here is the change in the prevalence rate of Plasmodium falciparum, the primary parasite in Africa, between 2000 and 2015. Is quite remarkable. So the thing about this, though, is that if we don't sustain these gains, then we've seen in the past, historically, resurgence is almost inevitable. These charts are just showing various areas where a malaria elimination program came in and brought down the incidence significantly, and as soon as they pull out, then it spikes back up. So that is why we talk so much about malaria elimination. If we don't get rid of it in these places completely, then it's going to come back. So TRI is primarily working in these malaria elimination areas or low endemic areas. And our goal is to optimize the programs, the existing programs within the governments, so that this is a sustainable approach for elimination. So just a little bit more on TRI. I won't talk too much about our organizational structure, but we provide technical, managerial, and act as a translation body between the government as well as state academia. My role, or my team, is the technical support. So we do a lot of stuff to help programs improve their analytics, their surveillance systems, and use their data to improve the way that they're running their malaria elimination campaigns. So I put our goal up here. Our goal with Missing Maps is to support country governments, strengthen surveillance, improve program planning, and enable stronger monitoring and execution of malaria elimination campaigns. So through working with Missing Maps and HOT, we aim to identify areas of malaria transmission, inform surveillance activities, and guide implementation of malaria elimination activities. And I'm going to go through these 3 things in a bit more detail with some examples of what we've done. So the first one is just that piece about identifying where transmission is happening. With the data from OpenStreetMap, we can add our epidemiological information on top of it. This is a risk map, so in addition to case data, we also add other epidemiological covariates as well as environmental variables to map where we think, or what the predicted incidence is. And now with the OpenStreetMap base layer, we can identify pockets or high-risk communities to target with interventions. In addition, we can use it as a base layer or to estimate populations and detect areas where cases are clustering, where maybe a single cluster of cases might have the same driver of transmission. For example, In this case, if cases are clustering in an area and we go and do a foci investigation and find that actually there's a swamp right next to this community, then we can do some larval source management and refine the way that we're approaching malaria elimination activities specifically to the driver of transmission for that area or that foci. In addition, another way that we're improving surveillance using OpenStreetMap is by providing maps. I think that's more of a traditional approach to using the OpenStreetMap data, but if we can provide community health workers or people that are doing active surveillance with these maps, they can go out into the communities and maybe mark off houses that they visited and tested, or start marking where cases are happening, marking where they're doing interventions, all sorts of things. So we're looking at different tools for this, whether it's paper maps or trying to figure out what electronic tools would be best for these governments, etc. Our biggest use case, though, that I think has been posted on all the mapping campaigns, at least in the CHI AOIs, has been IRS. IRS is indoor residual spraying. It's the coating of walls of a structure with insecticide. When a mosquito lands on the walls, it's killed. And this is the cornerstone of vector control in Southern Africa. It's a huge operation trying to cover all the households in these endemic areas. It's just logistically crazy. So there's a number of key challenges that are faced across the region, but at the core of each of these challenges is that they're not able to quantify how many buildings need to be sprayed or what population needs to be addressed with these interventions. And okay, so we're using OpenStreetMap data this year to improve the targeting and prioritization for insecticide spraying, as well as to monitor and evaluate coverage. So what this looks like is, for the targeting and prioritization process, historically, countries will do a geographical reconnaissance, go out into the fields, and maybe through a Warner process send somebody out in advance of the campaign to count up the number of buildings that need to be sprayed. Or maybe even before the planning process, they have some idea of the numbers that were sprayed, the number of houses that were sprayed maybe the year before. What we're doing is using OpenStreetMap data to either validate those numbers that they have already or to give them numbers that are more realistic. So you can see here the households are in yellow. I hope you can see it at least. And then again, we can overlay different epidemiological information so that countries can look at where their structures actually are, where the risk is high or where cases are happening, and determine where they actually need to be spraying. And then within these areas, we're trying to push for further prioritization so that on a day-to-day, their operations can be based on something more than just what's most convenient. By this I mean that if they're running out of fuel and they have to choose in a given ward which villages they're going to spray, then if they have these maps and they have some data available to them, they can make that decision based on which villages need intervention the most versus which ones next door. So this is a picture of some maps that we used in Botswana during the planning process to first rank clusters that we tried to use as a proxy for villages in order that they should be sprayed based on their case data. And then programs went through and made some adjustments to that based on what's operationally feasible. You wouldn't want to drive to one side of the ward and back and forth all over the place, so it has to be a balance between the two. And then the last piece of what we're doing to support this insecticide spraying is improving the way that they're monitoring the intervention. And this, I think, goes beyond IRS for any intervention. Rather than using a denominator of the number of structures or people visited, we really need to move towards a predetermined targeted number of structures or people. So with bed nets, for example, you wouldn't want to say we visited 100 people and we distributed 100 nets, so that means we have 100% coverage. Because actually there's 1,000 people living in that village. And so there's been issues with reporting in this way. So on that note, for next steps, or a limitation of the data that we have available now from all of these small area mapping campaigns, is that although, that's the animation, so although we have the buildings mapped in OpenStreetMap, we are missing some additional information on, one, what the polygons are, if they're households or commercial stores. It's hard to tell, really. We can do some modeling and estimations, but ultimately we need some more information on what the structures are, as well as hopefully how many rooms there are. Because for something like IRS, you can imagine that if you go to a household and you're only able to spray one of the sleeping rooms, then the rest of the sleeping rooms where the family is living is not covered. We don't want this reporting of partial coverage. So these are our two big questions, and so next steps for us will be dipping our toes into and trying to figure out this field mapping component of this nice 3-step process that I got from the Missing Maps website. So we'll be working on that in the coming months. Here's a list we came up with of all of the different ways we hope to use OpenStreetMap data for malaria elimination activities. Some of them we're making more progress with than others, but I just wanted to put it up here to show how impactful this data could really be and how useful it's going to be for these campaigns. Cool, some acknowledgements and then questions.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think it's great. I think, like you said, a lot of people were involved in this project, so I think it's great to see. Like,
yeah, I presented this pretty much same presentation at some hackathons, so sorry if it was redundant for anyone in the audience.
Any questions?
Yes, is your operational data available for others in the humanitarian community to use? Somebody might be doing interventions that are related but not exactly the same as yours.
What do you mean operational data?
How many places you've sprayed, for example, and where?
Unfortunately, a lot of the times we are not able to publish that data or share it because we're working so closely with the governments. It's ultimately their decision. And,
I understand.
Data sharing is a bit of an issue in the region. Actually, I don't know if it's just to the Southern African region, but
Okay, thank you.
It also, the data makes existing, so we were involved in helping develop M-Spray for Accra spray. The data makes traditional IRS look terrible. So there's a lot of sensitivity around, you know, they got PMI is giving $200 million a year, whatever it is. They're very afraid of undermining next round funding with this new data because it shows how ineffective IRS is if you're not mapping it properly. So it's quite controversial. So that's why the data's not out.
Change the denominator from visited to targeted. Yeah. The coverage metrics go from 70 to 90% of structures coverage to like 11% in some pretty important areas. So there's a political component to it as well. But that's, yeah, that affects or is an obstacle to sharing the data, and it's also been an obstacle for us getting programs to adopt this approach and using the.
Sorry to jump in, but the spray targeted, this is the global health indicator for way to measure all global health, basically. Because we all measure it the way on top. Like when you walk down Main Street, which homes do you see? You do your activity, you pat yourself on the back. What OSM allows us to see is what does actual true coverage look like? And you can see all the hamlets that are missing. So that's why it's so exciting.
Yeah. I've gotten to be in some meetings where we present some maps and show like our IRS data where they collected GPS points and reported 90% coverage. Then we put it over OpenStreetMap and see that 11%. No faces in the room or
That's due to, say, just the differences in the amount of buildings that are present in the, say, the data set that we use to determine these figures.
I don't really understand your question, but
what causes the differences? Is it just the amount of buildings that's visible on different maps? Let's say.
They don't have maps to begin with most of the time. Or like he was saying with the Main Street thing, and the buildings that are closer to the roads get sprayed, and then when it's farther out, they don't. A lot of buildings are missed.
what are you doing next? Like more hackathons, more field visits? What's looks like the next steps?
Well, you guys covered all of our areas of interest right now. So, I think I had on one of the slides, we've been pushing a lot for that step 1, the remote mapping, and then we're a big user of the data at step 3. But that 2 part, nobody at TRI has done or has any idea of what to do. So we've been working with some people from HOC to figure out how they can come and support us doing that. Maybe how we can take it forward with the programs themselves.
Resistance is a big issue in MSF at the moment in terms of malaria, both the ACTs and the BEDNETs. Have you guys done any work mapping, like regional resistance?
We're trying to do that. It's actually very difficult to get good data on the resistance just because I think the research in that area is not available, or it's not so well done or comprehensive. But I think it's in Southern Africa, especially because IRS is such an important intervention. That's a really big question that everyone's interested in. I'd love to see what you guys are doing.
I believe it.
Someone
You are the right person.
Okay.
You talked a lot about targeting and prioritizing different areas, which I'm assuming includes like the number of buildings and then the risk, but are there other variables that you take into account for like a higher level prioritization? Or what do you guys take into account when you're prioritizing?
Well, the risk is based on a risk map, which includes case information as well as other variables like climate, vegetation, access to treatment, access to the nearest towns. There's so many different variables that go into those. So that's all considered, but ultimately the operational feasibility component really comes in and is the main driver of decision making now. So we're just trying to present data in a simple way to show that maybe what's operationally feasible isn't what makes sense based on your case data and where cases are happening. So that's the main thing that we're trying to use as a variable for decision making.
Is the risk map a TRI internal thing?
No, we get our risk maps from the Malaria Atlas Project, as well as University of Southampton works on a few countries for us. There you go, there's some acknowledgements. Some of these risk maps are available on the Malaria Atlas Project website.
Sorry, maybe you covered it, maybe I just missed it. So are you using the OpenStreetMap data of structures to drive visiting? To say, okay, we know that we've been to these 12 places, but we see these structures over here we haven't visited? Or is that future?
We're going to do it now to some degree using, a lot of the spray teams are going to collect data electronically, record GPS coordinates of where they go, and we can lay that like on a dashboard over an OpenStreetMap base layer and view it that way. In the future, it would be awesome if the data collection teams or the spray teams on the ground were able to click on the structures and add data to it like that. I think there's a lot of tools out there that are in the works, and that's the direction that everyone's thinking.
You may have spoke about it earlier, I came in late, but I was curious if you'd speak more about what you just talked about, the field data collection. Curious what you see those teams using and in what ways. How are you going about like selecting and developing field data collection tools? I think there's a lot of people here thinking about that.
Yeah, sure. This year, we're primarily using a tool developed by UCSF called Disarm. The data collection component of that is built off of Survey.js. But as far as the way they presented it to us, it's very similar to ODK, which I think is used by other malaria programs. Again, the data collection teams, the way it's structured, you have the spray operators, and then they have a manager or a supervisor. That person is the one that's going to be collecting the data in those countries. They go around and collect the GPS coordinate as well as information on the number of rooms within that household, the number of rooms sprayed, the number of people living there. And then ideally, that information needs to be pushed onto some sort of dashboard or some presentation of that information so that decision makers can view that and say, you missed all these structures over here, go back, or you need to send mop-ups or a SPCC campaign over here to get people to accept this intervention. Is that helpful?
Yes, thanks.
Okay.